Under the radiant glow of crystal chandeliers in the opulent ballroom of the Langley estate, the atmosphere of the elite gala pulsed with extravagance, a vibrant tapestry woven from light, wealth, and ambition. Delicate melodies from a string quartet mingled with the crystalline clink of champagne flutes, while the air carried the intoxicating scent of exclusive perfumes. Gilded walls shimmered, reflecting a scene of breathtaking elegance, yet beneath this glossy veneer lay the ruthless calculations of high society. At the heart of the room stood Nathan Langley, a young millionaire with a magnetic smile and piercing blue eyes brimming with authority. His tailored black suit hugged his tall frame, every calculated gesture drawing the gazes of powerful tycoons in bespoke attire and aristocratic ladies in sparkling couture gowns. But tonight, a shadow loomed over his flawless facade, a reckless gamble weighing heavily on his heart, thrusting him into a game of deception, love, and shattered truths. The crowd fell silent, the air taut as a violin string, when Victor Drake, Nathan's friend and rival, strode forward, his sly smile masking predatory eyes. His voice, sharp and provocative, sliced through the music like a blade, announcing a daring wager. $10 million that Nathan could not transform Sophie Turner, a humble secretary at Langley Enterprises, into the perfect wife within 6 months. Whispers erupted, curious eyes locking onto Nathan as if he were the star of a gripping drama unfolding before them. He tightened his grip on his champagne flute, jaw clenched, a surge of pride swelling in his chest. Accepting the bet was a chance to prove his unparalleled skill, a way to cement his reputation as a man who could mold anyone to his will. Yet a flicker of unease sparked within him, a sense that he was stepping into a game with risks he couldn't fully grasp. He glanced at the towering windows, where Chicago's city lights twinkled like distant stars, but his mind drifted to Sophie Turner, a woman he'd barely noticed. He told himself she was merely a pawn, a challenge to conquer, but the memory of her quiet dedication, glimpsed in the office, unsettled him, as if she held a depth he couldn't yet fathom. Nathan stood frozen, the chilled champagne flute in his hand, the crowd's murmurs growing louder, their eyes like predators circling prey. He took a sip, the sharp bitterness stinging his tongue, and told himself this was a game he would win, a testament to his ability to craft perfection. But Victor's mocking smile and the weight of the wager pressed down, like chains binding him to a future he hadn't chosen. Sophie, the woman named, was absent, yet Nathan saw her daily. A slender figure with intelligent emerald eyes and a genuine smile that seemed out of place in the corporate world. To him, she was a blank canvas, a means to an end, unaware that this marriage would draw him into a labyrinth of painful revelations and a love he never anticipated. The question lingered. Why had Victor proposed this bet, and what secrets hid behind his calculating gaze? Far from the ballroom's splendor, Sophie sat at her desk in the Langley Enterprises office, morning light streaming through a narrow window, illuminating the neatly stacked documents before her. Her slender fingers handled files with ease, her simple navy dress a stark contrast to the glamour surrounding the company. Her sharp, focused emerald eyes betrayed a purpose far beyond her secretarial role. A distant phone's ring went unnoticed as she reviewed an encrypted message on a secure device. An order from her true masters. A rival corporation bent on destroying Langley Enterprises. Sophie was no ordinary employee. She was a corporate spy, embedded to steal critical secrets, a mission that had shaped her life for months. The sound of polished shoes broke her focus, and she looked up, eyes narrowing as Nathan entered, his gray suit radiating authority, his cold gaze sweeping over her. Without preamble, he placed a check on her desk, the $5 million figure gleaming like an empty promise. He demanded she marry him within 6 months, in exchange for a life of luxury. Sophie held her breath, her fingers trembling as they touched the check, a bitter smile flickering across her lips, as if it were a cruel jest from a man steeped in privilege. But Nathan's unwavering gaze and the staggering sum dissolved her fleeting defiance. She wanted to refuse, to tell him to take his money elsewhere, but the encrypted message burned in her mind, a reminder of her mission to infiltrate Langley's inner circle and gather data that could topple his empire. She exhaled, suppressing a storm of emotions, and nodded. Nathan mirrored her nod, turned, and left her with the check and a pang in her chest. She knew she'd entered a dangerous game, but her purpose was clear. Betray Langley Enterprises, using Nathan's estate as her battlefield. Sophie lingered at her desk, tucking the check away, her gaze returning to a family photo hidden in her purse. Their hopeful faces were a silent anchor, a reminder of the life she'd forsaken to become a spy, driven by the need to shield them from financial ruin. The office, with its sterile walls and the hum of corporate life, stood worlds apart from the realm she was about to enter, a testament to the disguise she'd perfected. This was no mere transaction. Nathan Langley, with his sharp intellect and guarded demeanor, was a formidable opponent, and every moment in his domain would test the secretarial persona she'd crafted. She drew a deep breath, a flame of resolve burning within, tinged with a trace of fear. Thinking of Nathan, his cold authority, the fleeting curiosity in his eyes, she sensed this game might not only expose his company's secrets, but could unravel her own carefully guarded heart. Back in the ballroom, Nathan lingered as the crowd dispersed, champagne flute still in hand. He gazed out at the city, its lights a mosaic of ambition, but his mind clung to Sophie, a woman he'd once deemed insignificant. He told himself she was a challenge, a canvas to shape for victory over Victor. But Victor's knowing smile and the guests' whispers made him feel like he was stepping onto a chessboard with unseen pieces. He took another sip, the bitterness lingering, and pushed his unease aside. He was Nathan Langley, unshakable. Yet in the stillness, a whisper warned that his heart, long thought invulnerable, was stirring with questions he couldn't answer. Two worlds apart, neither saw the path fate had carved, a journey where love, betrayal, and truth would collide. The Langley estate, with its radiant elegance, was now a chessboard. Each move by Sophie and Nathan, a delicate balance between triumph and ruin. Sophie stood in her office, eyes blazing with purpose, but her heart raced, sensing a storm approaching. Nathan, in the estate, felt a chill breeze through the window, as if fate itself signaled the trials ahead. Both believed they held control, unaware that the heart could rewrite the rules of any game. The rhythmic clatter of a typewriter filled the confined office at Langley Enterprises, where Sophie Turner sat, her fingers moving swiftly across the keys, bathed in the soft morning light that cast delicate shadows over her modest desk. Her navy blouse, simple yet neatly pressed, stood in sharp contrast to the fierce determination burning within her, her emerald eyes darting to an encrypted message on her secure phone. A directive from her true employers, a rival firm intent on toppling Nathan Langley's empire. As a corporate spy, Sophie had spent months perfecting the role of a humble secretary, each gesture calculated to pilfer the company's secrets. The memory of Nathan's visit days earlier, his cold presentation of a $5 million check to marry him within 6 months, lingered like a bitter wound, a stark reminder of the man she was tasked to betray. His proposal, rooted in a reckless bet to transform her into the perfect wife, offered a rare chance to infiltrate his inner circle, but his piercing blue eyes, tinged with an unsettling curiosity, had sown a seed of doubt. Nathan was no ordinary mark. His charisma was a weapon, and Sophie would need every shred of her cunning to navigate his world without losing her resolve. Nathan's abrupt appearance in her cubicle had been a jarring disruption, his sleek gray suit a stark contrast to the office's drab gray walls. He had entered with the confidence of a man accustomed to command, his voice sharp as he laid out the terms. A 6-month marriage to win a bet, a transaction to prove his ability to shape her in exchange for a life of luxury. Sophie had played her part flawlessly, her feigned shock at the check masking the rapid calculations in her mind. Accepting his deal dovetailed perfectly with her mission to access Langley Enterprises' confidential data, a task that could dismantle Nathan's company and secure her family's future. Yet his commanding presence, the way his gaze seemed to pierce her carefully crafted facade, sparked a flicker of unease. He wasn't merely a target, He was a man who thrived on deciphering people, and Sophie would need to shield her true identity to avoid being exposed in a game where trust was a dangerous trap she couldn't afford to fall into. Back at her desk, Sophie slipped her phone into her bag, her hands steady despite the weight of her decision. She opened a drawer, retrieving a concealed microchip and a locket holding a photo of her family, their hopeful smiles a constant anchor to her purpose. The locket was her touchstone, forged in the wreckage of her family's financial ruin, a crisis that had propelled her into this covert life. Her fingers brushed the locket, her jaw tightening as she recalled their hardships, the desperation that had driven her to embrace this perilous mission. This was for them, for the stability she'd sworn to restore, and Sophie couldn't allow personal feelings, especially not for a man like Nathan, to derail her. The secretarial persona, honed to deflect suspicion, was her armor, but Nathan's offer had raised the stakes, and the pressure of her double life felt like a tightening vice around her chest. Meanwhile, in downtown Chicago, Nathan Langley stood on the balcony of his private office, the city's skyline a glittering monument to his dominion beyond the glass doors. The office was a bastion of power, with sleek furniture and walls adorned with abstract art. But Nathan's attention was fixed on a single file. Sophie Turner's, assembled by his private investigator. The details were sparse. Born in Chicago, modest education, no significant relationships. But their simplicity felt too polished, too deliberate. Leaning against the railing, Nathan swirled a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the morning light as he replayed their encounter in the office. Sophie's quiet competence, her genuine smile despite his abrupt proposal had caught him off guard, but there was a sharpness in her eyes, a guarded depth that didn't align with an ordinary secretary. Nathan lived for control, reading people with ease, but Sophie was an enigma, and the challenge stirred a spark of intrigue he hadn't felt in years. The contract signing was scheduled for the next day, a formal ceremony to seal their marriage terms and launch his wager with Victor. Nathan had orchestrated every detail, from the legal documents to the sophisticated wardrobe Sophie would wear, ensuring her transformation would be flawless. He viewed it as a game, a chance to demonstrate his mastery. But the memory of Sophie's unwavering gaze lingered, igniting a curiosity that bordered on fascination. Nathan had built his life by guarding his heart, toughened by years of corporate battles and betrayal. But Sophie's presence was a crack in his defenses, unsettling his meticulously ordered world. He opened a drawer, retrieving a photo from a recent gala, his confident smile beside Victor's. His friend's bet felt like a calculated taunt, a move with hidden motives, and Nathan sensed a larger game at play, one he couldn't yet unravel. Sophie prepared to leave the office, a limousine waiting to transport her to Nathan's elite world. She adjusted her blouse, her movements precise and practiced, her secretarial persona a second skin she'd worn for months. The city's neon glow was a stark contrast to her modest apartment, and Sophie felt the burden of her dual identity pressing heavily on her shoulders. In the office bathroom, she stood before a small mirror, smoothing her hair, her reflection a stranger. Sophie Turner, the unassuming secretary, not the spy tasked with betrayal. Her secure phone buzzed with a new message. Langley's gala is your entry. Secure the files. Sophie memorized the instructions, her training taking over. But the thought of facing Nathan again, stepping into his dazzling domain, stirred a blend of determination and apprehension. Nathan was more than a target. He was a man whose magnetism could unravel even the most fortified heart, and Sophie needed to remain vigilant to resist his allure. The signing took place in a sterile boardroom, its glass walls framing the city skyline. Sophie sat across from Nathan, flanked by lawyers and Victor, whose smug grin grated on her nerves. The documents detailed the terms. A 6-month marriage, Sophie adhering to Nathan's transformation plan, and a commitment to protect his reputation. She signed with a steady hand, her voice soft but resolute, but her eyes locked on Nathan, probing for a weakness in his armor. Nathan's gaze held firm, a mix of detachment and curiosity, and Sophie felt a jolt, a spark threatening to blur the lines of her mission. The lawyers' voices droned on, but Sophie's focus stayed on Nathan, The subtle tap of his fingers on the table, the faint curve of his lips, and she forced herself to look away, grounding herself in the memory of her family's faces. After the signing, Nathan escorted Sophie to his estate, a sprawling mansion exuding wealth and authority. Her suite was a world apart from her apartment, with silk linens and a balcony overlooking the city. Alone, Sophie unpacked, secreting the microchip in a hidden corner, its data linked to her contacts. She activated her secure phone, sending confirmation, but her thoughts drifted to Nathan, the man who'd offered her a fortune, who saw her as a project, yet whose gaze held a depth she couldn't dismiss. Stepping onto the balcony, the city lights twinkling like a siren's call, she whispered, "Stay focused, Turner." But Nathan's cologne, lingering from their handshake, was a reminder of the treacherous game she played, where every step could jeopardize her mission, or her heart. Nathan, in his office, reviewed the contract, his mind buzzing with strategies to mold Sophie into the ideal wife, but her presence, her quiet strength and authentic warmth, was an unexpected variable. He opened a bottle of scotch, pouring a glass as he gazed at the city below, his empire a testament to his dominance. Yet Sophie was a breach in that dominance, and Nathan felt a pull he couldn't define, a desire to know the woman behind the secretarial mask, not as a challenge, but as someone who saw through his defenses. The mansion, with its opulent halls and concealed truths, was no longer just a residence. It was a crucible, forging a bond neither could deny, even as it threatened to consume them both. The soft rustle of silk gowns and the murmur of refined whispers filled the opulent dining room of the Langley estate, where a private luncheon unfolded beneath the gentle glow of a crystal chandelier, its prisms scattering light across gleaming silverware. Nathan Langley sat at the head of the table, his tailored charcoal suit a symbol of authority, though a subtle restlessness simmered beneath his polished demeanor. His marriage to Sophie Turner, formalized days earlier in a stark boardroom to fulfill a bold wager, was a strategic step to shape her into the ideal wife and secure victory over Victor Drake's bet. Yet Sophie's presence, across the table, her poise understated yet captivating, stirred a flicker of doubt in his guarded heart. Dressed in an elegant emerald gown, she moved through the elite gathering with a grace that defied her secretarial roots, her emerald eyes radiating a warmth that hinted at depths Nathan hadn't foreseen. The contract signing had been routine, but the memory of her steady gaze and the brief warmth of her hand during the ring exchange lingered like a spark, hinting at a game more dangerous than he'd envisioned. Sophie sat with practiced composure, her smile a delicate shield against the scrutinizing stares of the guests, board members, investors, and socialites, whose curiosity veiled their judgment. As Sophie Turner, the unassuming secretary, she played her role flawlessly, nodding politely and responding softly. But beneath this facade, she was a corporate spy, tasked with stealing Langley Enterprises' secrets for a rival firm. The microchip hidden in her suite was active, relaying data to her contact. But Nathan's presence tested her resolve. His sharp, inquisitive gaze seemed to pierce her disguise, and Sophie felt a surge of unease, aware that each interaction risked exposing her mission, or her heart, which trembled under his unexpected attention. Nathan guided the luncheon with effortless charm, his smile a crafted mask as he steered discussions toward market growth and strategic alliances, reinforcing his command over his empire. But Sophie's quiet strength and genuine warmth drew his attention, despite his intent to view her as a project. He'd expected a plain, pliable woman, easily molded to win his bet. But Sophie's insightful responses to investors' queries revealed a keen intellect that unsettled him. During a toast, their hands brushed as they raised their glasses, sending a jolt through Nathan, a spark he couldn't quell. He masked it with a curt nod, but the moment left him shaken, his goal of transforming her clashing with a growing fascination with the woman he'd married. The luncheon was a precursor to a grand charity gala, where Nathan aimed to unveil Sophie as his wife, silencing doubters and securing his triumph over Victor. For Sophie, the gala was a chance to infiltrate Nathan's private office, rumored to hold files on Langley Enterprises' confidential projects, vital to her mission. She'd overheard Victor and a board member discussing secure data, confirming the office's significance. During a quiet afternoon, Sophie slipped into the estate's library to study security protocols, her notebook open to pages detailing Nathan's routines and the company's weaknesses. She added notes on the office's layout and Victor's movements, but Nathan's image, his commanding presence at the luncheon, the fleeting warmth of his touch, intruded, her pen faltering as her heart ached with the burden of her deceit. She was there to betray him, but Nathan was becoming more than a target, and the thought of his downfall tormented her. In his private study, Nathan stood before a locked cabinet, his fingers pausing on the key as he wrestled with unease. The luncheon had reassured investors, but Sophie's performance, her wit, her quiet confidence, had rattled him. He'd anticipated a timid, unpolished woman, a blank canvas for his bet, but Sophie's sharp intellect and authentic warmth defied his expectations. The memory of their hands brushing during the toast haunted him, a persistent spark. He unlocked the cabinet, retrieving a sealed file from his father, its cryptic notes on past rivals fueling suspicions that Victor's bet was more than a game. Sipping scotch, its burn grounding him, Nathan felt a pull toward Sophie, a need to know her, not as a project, but as a woman who saw through his defenses. The gala, a dazzling spectacle in the estate's grand ballroom, brimmed with crystal vases overflowing with orchids and chandeliers casting golden light over silk-draped tables. Sophie entered on Nathan's arm, their hands clasped in a display of unity, though a palpable distance lingered. Nathan's smile was polished, but his eyes lingered on Sophie, blending scrutiny with curiosity, quickening her pulse. The crowd whispered about the secretary turned lady, and Sophie answered their questions with disarming charm, her voice steady. But Nathan's nearness, his hand grazing hers during a dance, his breath warm as he whispered instructions, unsettled her, her heart torn between her mission and his presence. Seizing Nathan's distraction, Sophie slipped into his office, her tools hidden in a clutch. The room, a bastion of power with art-lined walls, held a locked file cabinet. Working swiftly, her hand steady despite adrenaline, she opened it, finding files on patents and deals, but no direct link to her employer's target. She photographed the pages, her breath shallow, when a hallway noise froze her. Tucking the photos into her clutch, she hid behind a desk as Nathan entered, his suit catching the light, his expression troubled. Sophie held her breath, praying he'd missed the subtle disturbance, but his gaze paused at the cabinet. For a moment, discovery seemed imminent, but he left, and she exhaled, trembling. The gala ended with pledges and applause, but Sophie's triumph was hollow, the photos a heavy burden, Nathan's presence a reminder of her deception's cost. In her suite, clutching her family's photo, Nathan's face, his strength, his vulnerability, eclipsed all else. She'd come to destroy him, but he was becoming part of her, and the thought of his ruin was a fresh agony. The scent of orchids wafted through the window, a fleeting reminder of beauty in this perilous game, and Sophie braced for her next move, where truth and love would collide. Nathan stood alone in his study, the city lights a distant hum, his mind a battleground of doubt and desire. Sophie's enigma burned through his control, the office incident sharpening his instincts. The mansion, with its gilded halls and veiled truths, was a crucible forging a bond neither could ignore, threatening to consume them. The path ahead was shadowed, a dance of secrets and longing that would test their hearts, forcing a truth that could bind or break them. A crumpled memo lay abandoned on the polished floor of Sophie Turner's suite, its cryptic corporate phrases a fading whisper of the secrets she was tasked to steal, now drowned out by the turmoil raging in her heart. She stood by the balcony, Chicago's skyline a dazzling void beyond the glass, her hand gripping a drive loaded with photographs of Langley Enterprises' confidential files. Each image was a weapon, designed to betray Nathan Langley and fulfill her role as a corporate spy for his rival. But the lack of incriminating evidence against Nathan gnawed at her, a quiet suspicion that he might be a pawn in a grander scheme. Nathan's presence, his commanding charisma tempered by rare glimpses of vulnerability, had become a storm, eroding her determination with an unforeseen love that threatened to engulf her mission in waves of guilt and yearning. The locket with her family's photo, pressed against her chest, was a stark reminder of her duty. But Nathan's face, his strength, his subtle warmth, glowed fiercer, a flame that could either redeem or ruin her. The days since her covert raid on Nathan's office had been a delicate balancing act, with Sophie juggling her role as his wife against the crushing weight of her deception. The mansion's marble corridors were a maze of power and treachery, each room a potential repository of corporate secrets. Nathan's efforts to shape Sophie into the ideal wife had grown more intense, with demanding lessons in high society etiquette and corporate tactics. And Sophie played the dutiful secretary with meticulous precision, her genuine smile deflecting his scrutiny. But his gaze was a piercing blade, slicing through her facade with a blend of curiosity and something deeper, perhaps affection, that set her pulse racing. During a private tour of the mansion's art gallery, Nathan's hand lingered on hers as he described a painting's nuances, and the warmth of his touch sparked a fire she couldn't douse. She masked it with a timid nod, but the moment left her shaken, her mission at odds with a longing to be seen, not as Sophie Turner or a spy, but as a woman who could stand by his side. Nathan, in his private study, stood before a locked safe, his fingers pausing on the combination as he wrestled with growing unease. The gala had been a success, showcasing Sophie's transformation and quieting doubters, but her performance, her sharp intellect, her understated grace, had unnerved him. He'd expected a simple, malleable woman, a canvas for his wager. But Sophie was far more. Her insights were too precise, her warmth too authentic for a mere secretary. The office incident, where he'd sensed a disturbance, had heightened his instincts, and the memory of her steady gaze during the gallery tour lingered, a quiet challenge. He opened the safe, retrieving a sealed letter from Victor, its vague warning of unseen threats stoking his suspicion that the bet was a calculated ploy. Sipping scotch, its burn anchoring him, Nathan felt a pull towards Sophie, a need to unravel her, not as a project, but as a woman who pierced his guarded heart. The next event, a high-stakes board meeting with Langley Enterprises' top executives, had unfolded days earlier, and Sophie saw it as her chance to access a secure server in Victor's office, rumored to hold encrypted communications vital to her mission. She'd overheard Victor and an executive discussing sensitive data, confirming the server's value. Moving stealthily, Sophie slipped into the mansion's tech room during a quiet morning to analyze the server's access protocols. Her notebook, filled with detailed records of Nathan's movements and the company's weaknesses, grew with new notes on the server's location and Victor's routines. But as she wrote, Nathan's image surfaced, his fierce resolve at the gala, the fleeting tenderness in his touch, and her pen hesitated, her heart heavy with the cost of her lies. She was there to betray him, but Nathan was becoming more than a target, and the thought of his destruction was a fresh torment. Nathan, preparing for the meeting, stood before a mirror in his suite, adjusting a cufflink engraved with the Langley crest, its weight a reminder of his empire's burden. Sophie's presence was an enigma, her resilience challenging his control, and the office incident had ignited his instincts. Her cautious smile in the gallery, the unspoken depth in her eyes, stirred a need to know her beyond his wager. He resolved to probe Sophie at the meeting, but a deeper fear lingered, what he might uncover about her, and the bet that ensnared them. Reviewing a financial report on his laptop, the rising threat of rivals cast a shadow over his legacy, and Victor's bet felt like a deliberate trap. The board meeting, held in the mansion's austere conference room with mahogany paneling and crystal vases, was a crucible of ambition. Sophie entered beside Nathan, her crimson dress gleaming, her composure flawless, her heart pounding. The executives, their faces carved with greed, buzzed with anticipation, but Sophie focused on Victor, his smug demeanor a reminder of his secrets. She navigated discussions with finesse, her charm disarming skeptics, but Nathan's gaze was relentless, tracking her every move. During a break, his hand grazed hers as he passed a document, a deliberate touch that surged through her, her mission warring with a desire to linger. She deflected with a nod, but her heart raced, torn between duty and the man beside her. Seizing Nathan's distraction, Sophie slipped into Victor's office, her tools hidden in a clutch. The room, a stronghold of control with walls of legal documents, housed a humming server and a locked cabinet. Working swiftly, her hands steady despite adrenaline, she bypassed security, downloading files on patents and deals, but found no link to her employer's target. Transferring the data, her breath shallow, a hallway sound halted her. She hid the drive and ducked behind a bookshelf as Nathan entered, his suit catching the light, his expression troubled. Sophie held her breath, praying he'd miss the subtle shift, but his gaze paused at the cabinet. For a moment, exposure loomed, but he left, and she exhaled, trembling. The meeting ended with agreements and applause, but Sophie's victory was empty, the drive a searing burden, Nathan's presence a reminder of her betrayal's cost. In her suite, clutching her family's photo, Nathan's face, his strength, his vulnerability, overshadowed all. She'd come to destroy him, but he was becoming part of her, and his potential ruin was a new agony. The city's pulse echoed beyond the window, a fleeting reminder of beauty in this deadly game, and Sophie braced for her next move, where truth and love would collide. Nathan stood alone in his office, the skyline a distant glow, his mind a battlefield of doubt and desire. Sophie's mystery was a wildfire, consuming his control, the office incident fueling his instincts. The mansion, with its gilded halls and veiled truths, was a crucible forging a bond neither could escape, threatening to consume them. The path ahead was shrouded, a dance of secrets and longing that would test their hearts, forcing a truth that could bind or break them. The faint strains of a distant jazz melody floated through the open window of Sophie Turner's suite, its melancholy notes blending with the quiet, a poignant counterpoint to the tempest churning in her heart. She stood before a gilded mirror, her crimson gown catching the morning light, her hands trembling as they gripped a hidden drive, its contents, photographs of Langley Enterprises' confidential files, a silent explosive ready to betray Nathan Langley. Each image marked progress in her mission as a corporate spy, tasked by a rival to unravel Nathan's empire, but the lack of evidence implicating him personally gnawed at her, a quiet doubt that he might be ensnared in a larger plot. Nathan's presence, his magnetic charm softened by rare moments of tenderness, had become a current, drawing her into a love she resisted, threatening to wash away her mission in a deluge of guilt and desire. The locket with her family's photo, pressed against her chest, anchored her to her duty. But Nathan's face, his resolve, his subtle vulnerability, shone like a lighthouse, urging her to question all she'd held true. The days since her stealthy raid on Victor's office had been a relentless ordeal, with Sophie balancing her role as Nathan's wife against the truths she'd uncovered. The mansion's marble corridors were a maze of ambition and deception, each room a potential cache of secrets to fuel her mission. Nathan's efforts to mold Sophie into the perfect wife had intensified, with rigorous lessons in global economics and elite etiquette, and Sophie maintained her secretarial facade with precision, her warm smile deflecting his scrutiny. But his gaze was a piercing flame, cutting through her disguise with a mix of suspicion and warmth that set her heart ablaze. During a private dinner in the mansion's conservatory, surrounded by blooming orchids, Nathan's hand rested gently on hers as he shared a rare personal story, and the electric warmth of his touch sparked a longing she couldn't quell. She masked it with a soft smile, but the moment left her rattled, her mission at odds with a yearning to be seen, not as Sophie Turner or a spy, but as a woman who could belong in his world. Nathan, in his private office, stood before a wall of financial ledgers, his fingers trembling as they traced entries hinting at rivals' growing threats. The recent board meeting had secured executive loyalty, but Sophie's performance, her sharp insights, her quiet grace, had deepened his unease. He'd expected a plain, moldable woman, easily shaped for his bet, but Sophie's keen intellect and genuine warmth defied his assumptions. The office incident, where he'd sensed a disturbance, had sharpened his instincts, and the memory of her steady gaze at the conservatory dinner lingered, a spark that refused to fade. He opened a locked drawer, retrieving a cryptic email from Victor, its warning of external pressures, now a haunting echo. Sipping scotch, its burn steadying him, Nathan felt a pull toward Sophie, a need to decipher her, not as a project, but as a woman who breached his guarded heart. The next event, a lavish fundraiser for the Langley Foundation, had unfolded hours earlier, a glittering stage for Nathan to display Sophie's transformation and claim victory over Victor. Sophie saw it as her chance to access a hidden safe in Victor's private quarters, rumored to hold notes tied to the rival's plans. She'd overheard Victor and an unidentified contact whispering about final directives, confirming the safe's significance. Moving covertly, Sophie slipped into the mansion's security hub during a quiet morning to study the safe's access protocols. Her notebook, filled with Nathan's habits and the company's vulnerabilities, grew with notes on the safe's location and Victor's movements. But as she wrote, Nathan's image surfaced, his fierce resolve at the board meeting, the fleeting softness in his touch. And her pen hesitated, her heart heavy with the weight of her deceit. She was there to betray him, but Nathan was becoming more than a target, and the thought of his ruin was a fresh torment. Nathan, preparing for the fundraiser, stood before a mirror in his suite, adjusting a tie pin engraved with the Langley crest, its weight a reminder of his empire's burden. Sophie's presence was a puzzle, her resilience challenging his control, and the office incident had set his instincts ablaze. Her cautious smile in the conservatory, the unspoken depth in her eyes, stirred a need to know her beyond the bet. He resolved to probe Sophie at the fundraiser, wary of what he might uncover about her and the wager that bound them. Reviewing a financial report on his laptop, the rising threat of rivals loomed over his legacy, and Victor's bet felt like a calculated trap. The fundraiser was a dazzling spectacle in the mansion's grand foyer, with crystal vases brimming with lilies and chandeliers casting golden light over fine china. Sophie entered beside Nathan, her crimson gown radiant, her composure steady, her heart racing. The guests, philanthropists and tycoons, buzzed with anticipation, but Sophie focused on Victor, his smug demeanor a reminder of his secrets. She navigated the crowd with finesse, her charm disarming skeptics, but Nathan's gaze was relentless, tracking her every move. During a speech, his hand grazed hers in a gesture of unity, the warmth surging through her, her mission warring with a desire to linger. She deflected with a nod, but her heart pounded, torn between duty and the man beside her. Seizing Nathan's distraction, Sophie slipped into Victor's quarters, her tools hidden in a clutch. The room, a bastion of power with portrait-lined walls, held a safe behind a false panel, its lock formidable. Working swiftly, her hands steady despite adrenaline, she opened it, finding notes on the rival's plans, names, dates, but no link to Nathan. She photographed the pages, her breath shallow, when a hallway sound froze her. Hiding the photos, she ducked behind a curtain as Nathan entered, his suit catching the light, his expression troubled. Sophie held her breath, praying he'd missed the subtle shift, but his gaze paused at the panel. For a moment, exposure loomed, but he left, and she exhaled, trembling. The fundraiser ended with record pledges and applause, but Sophie's triumph was empty, the drive a searing burden, Nathan's presence a reminder of her betrayal's cost. In her suite, clutching her family's photo, Nathan's face, his strength, his vulnerability, eclipsed all. She'd come to destroy him, but he was becoming part of her, and his potential ruin was a new agony. The scent of lilies wafted through the window, a fleeting reminder of beauty in this deadly game, and Sophie braced for her next move, where truth and love would collide. The soft creak of polished oak floorboards reverberated in the private study of the Langley estate, where Sophie Turner stood alone, her silhouette framed against towering bookshelves, the dim glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows over her trembling hands. Her crimson gown, slightly creased, hugged her form, its vibrancy clashing with the cold weight of the hidden drive she clutched, its contents, photographs of cryptic notes from Victor Drake's safe, a silent arsenal poised to dismantle Langley Enterprises. Each file was a deliberate strike in her mission as a corporate spy, but the growing uncertainty about Nathan Langley's role gnawed at her, a quiet suspicion that he might be a victim of his allies' machinations rather than the orchestrator she'd assumed. Nathan's presence, his commanding aura softened by rare moments of sincerity, had become a vortex, pulling her toward a love that threatened to unravel her purpose, its warmth at odds with the icy duty that had defined her life. The locket with her family's photo, nestled against her heart, tethered her to her mission. But Nathan's essence, his resilience, his unguarded moments, kindled a fire within, urging her to question her chosen path. The aftermath of her raid on Victor's quarters had left Sophie in a constant state of vigilance, every move shadowed by the fear of exposure. The mansion's lavish halls, adorned with gilded fixtures and echoing with whispered intrigues, were a perilous labyrinth where trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Nathan's efforts to mold her into the ideal spouse had grown more rigorous, with intensive lessons in diplomatic finesse and corporate strategy, and Sophie upheld her facade as a dutiful secretary with meticulous care, her disarming warmth shielding her from his probing gaze. Yet his eyes, sharp with curiosity yet softened by an unspoken bond, seemed to peel away her disguise, igniting a pulse of dread that her true identity might be revealed. During a quiet chess game in the mansion's library, Nathan's fingers grazed hers as he moved a knight, the fleeting touch sending a jolt through her, a spark of longing she couldn't suppress. She masked it with a shy smile, but the encounter left her heart racing, her mission clashing with a desire to be known, not as Sophie Turner or a spy, but as a woman who could belong in his world. Nathan, in his private office, stood before a sleek monitor displaying encrypted financial projections that hinted at rivals' aggressive moves against Langley Enterprises. The fundraiser had been a public success, bolstering his reputation, but Sophie's presence, her keen intellect, her effortless charm, had deepened his disquiet. He'd anticipated a simple, pliable woman, a tool to win his bet. But Sophie's precise insights and authentic warmth defied his expectations. The memory of her composed demeanor at the fundraiser, paired with the troubling disturbance in Victor's quarters, had sharpened his instincts, fueling a suspicion that her transformation was a facade. He opened a hidden compartment, retrieving a handwritten note from Victor, its vague mentions of strategic leverage now a cryptic riddle. Pouring a glass of scotch, its fiery bite grounding him, Nathan felt a current stirred by Sophie, a desire to understand her, not as a bet's prize, but as a woman who had pierced the fortress of his heart. The upcoming event, a clandestine summit with Langley's top shareholders, loomed as a critical moment to solidify his empire's stability. For Sophie, it was an opportunity to access a concealed laptop in Victor's private library, rumored to contain encrypted correspondence unveiling the rival's full strategy. She'd overheard Victor and an unidentified ally whispering about endgame protocols, underscoring the laptop's importance. Moving with precision, Sophie slipped into the mansion's security hub during a quiet afternoon to study the laptop's encryption. Her notebook, meticulously detailing Nathan's routines and the company's vulnerabilities, grew with notes on the laptop's location and Victor's patterns. Yet as she wrote, Nathan's image intruded. His unwavering resolve at the board meeting, the gentle brush of his hand, and her resolve wavered, her heart heavy with the cost of her betrayal. She was there to destroy him, but Nathan was becoming more than a target, and the prospect of his ruin was a new anguish. Nathan, preparing for the summit, stood before a mirror in his suite, adjusting a silver cufflink engraved with the Langley crest, its weight a reminder of his legacy's burden. Sophie's presence was an enigma, her authenticity challenging his control, and the incident in Victor's quarters had ignited his instincts. Her refined grace in the conservatory, the quiet strength in her eyes, awakened a need to know her beyond his guarded world. He resolved to observe Sophie closely at the summit, wary of what he might uncover about her, and the bet that ensnared them. Reviewing a report on his laptop, the growing shadow of rivals loomed, and Victor's bet felt like a calculated scheme, its motives veiled. The summit, held in the mansion's austere boardroom with polished wood and crystal, was a crucible of power. Sophie entered beside Nathan, her crimson gown radiant, her composure flawless, her heart pounding. The shareholders, their faces taut with ambition, buzzed with anticipation, but Sophie focused on Victor, his calculating demeanor a reminder of his secrets. She navigated discussions with finesse, her charm disarming skeptics. But Nathan's gaze was relentless, tracking her every gesture. During a pause, his hand lingered on hers as he passed a report, a deliberate touch that shivered through her, her mission warring with a longing to linger. She deflected with a nod, but her heart surged, torn between duty and the man beside her. Seizing Nathan's distraction, Sophie slipped into Victor's private library, her tools concealed in a clutch. The room, a fortress of knowledge with shelves of rare books, held a laptop on a desk, its screen dark but potent. Working swiftly, her hands steady despite adrenaline, she cracked the encryption, downloading correspondence outlining the rivals' plans, names, dates, but no direct tie to Nathan. Transferring the data, her breath rapid, a hallway creak halted her. She hid the drive and ducked behind a shelf as Nathan entered, his charcoal suit pristine, his expression troubled. Sophie held her breath, praying he'd miss the subtle shift, but his gaze paused at the desk. For a moment, exposure seemed imminent, but he left, and she exhaled, trembling. The summit ended with agreements and applause, but Sophie's triumph was bitter. The drive a heavy burden, Nathan's presence a reminder of her betrayal's cost. In her room, clutching her family's photo, Nathan's face, his strength, his vulnerability, dominated her thoughts. She'd come to destroy him, but he was becoming her anchor, and his potential ruin was a fresh wound. The city's hum pulsed beyond the window, a reminder of beauty's fragility in this deadly game. And Sophie braced for her next move. A crossroads where truth and love would collide. A single frayed ribbon lay coiled on the velvet chaise in Sophie Turner's room, its deep crimson threads a fragile remnant of the gown she'd worn, now a mute witness to the faltering resolve within her. She stood by the window, Chicago's dawn bathing the sky in hues of ash and gold, her hand steady as she concealed a drive, its contents, encrypted correspondence exposing the rivals' strategies, a potent weapon poised to collapse Langley Enterprises. Yet the uncertainty surrounding Nathan Langley's role in those schemes gnawed at her, a persistent doubt that he might be a target rather than a perpetrator. His presence, his commanding intellect interwoven with rare moments of warmth, had become a maelstrom, igniting a love that threatened to dismantle her mission as a corporate spy. The locket with her family's photo, pressed against her heart, was a stark reminder of her duty to secure their future. But Nathan's essence, his resilience, his fleeting tenderness, sparked a longing that burned through her defenses, urging her to question the cost of her betrayal. The aftermath of her covert infiltration into Victor's library had left Sophie in a perpetual state of tension, every step shadowed by the dread of discovery. The mansion's opulent halls with their polished marble and murmured intrigues were a treacherous landscape where loyalty was an illusion. Nathan's rigorous training to refine her into the ideal spouse had grown more complex, with sessions on cultural diplomacy and corporate alliances, and Sophie upheld her facade as a dutiful secretary with meticulous precision, her effortless sincerity shielding her from his probing gaze. Yet his eyes, sharp with suspicion, yet softened by an unspoken bond, seemed to unravel her disguise, stirring a pulse of fear that her true purpose might be exposed. During a private moment in the mansion's rose garden, where the air was heavy with floral scent, Nathan's hand steadied her as she stumbled on a stone path, and the warmth of his touch sent a surge of emotion through her, a longing she couldn't suppress. She masked it with a hurried apology, but the encounter left her heart pounding, her mission at odds with a desire to be known, not as Sophie Turner or a spy, but as a woman who could belong in his world. Nathan, in his private office, stood before a locked cabinet, its steel surface reflecting the dim light as he grappled with mounting unease. The shareholder summit loomed, a pivotal moment to solidify his empire's future. But Sophie's presence, her keen intellect, her effortless warmth, had deepened his disquiet. He'd expected a simple, compliant woman, a tool to win his bet. But Sophie's authenticity was too compelling, her grace too refined for a mere secretary. The memory of her poised demeanor at the fundraiser, coupled with the troubling disturbance in Victor's library, had ignited his instincts, a suspicion that her transformation was a veneer. He opened the cabinet, retrieving a sealed file on Victor, its cryptic notes about strategic partnerships, now an enigmatic puzzle. Pouring a glass of scotch, its fiery bite grounding him, Nathan felt a current stirred by Sophie. A desire to understand her, not as a bet's prize, but as a woman who had breached the fortress of his heart. The summit was hours away, a high-stakes arena where Nathan would showcase Sophie's transformation to quell doubts and secure investor confidence. For Sophie, it was an opportunity to access a hidden file cabinet in Victor's private study, rumored to contain handwritten notes detailing the rivals' ultimate goals. She'd overheard a fleeting exchange between Victor and an executive, their whispered mentions of final contingencies underscoring the cabinet's value. Moving with precision, Sophie slipped into the mansion's security hub during a quiet afternoon to analyze the cabinet's lock. Her notebook, a meticulous record of Nathan's routines and the company's weaknesses, grew with notes on the cabinet's location and Victor's patterns. Yet as she recorded her observations, Nathan's image intruded. His steadfast resolve at the board meeting, the gentle steadiness of his hand in the garden, and her resolve wavered, her heart heavy with the cost of her betrayal. She was there to destroy him, but Nathan was becoming more significant, and the prospect of his ruin was a fresh wound. Nathan, preparing for the summit, stood before a mirror in his suite, adjusting a silver cufflink engraved with the Langley crest, its weight a reminder of the legacy he bore. Sophie's presence was a persistent enigma, her authenticity challenging his control, and the library incident had set his instincts ablaze. Her refined grace in the conservatory, the quiet strength in her eyes, awakened a need to know her beyond the confines of the bet. He resolved to observe Sophie closely at the summit, wary of what he might uncover about her and the wager that ensnared them. Reviewing a report on his laptop, the growing shadow of rivals loomed, and Victor's bet felt like a calculated scheme, its motives veiled. The summit, held in the mansion's austere boardroom with polished wood and crystal, was a crucible of power. Sophie entered beside Nathan, her crimson gown radiant, her composure flawless, her heart racing. The shareholders, their faces taut with ambition, buzzed with anticipation, but Sophie focused on Victor, his calculating demeanor a reminder of his secrets. She navigated discussions with finesse, her charm disarming skeptics, but Nathan's gaze was relentless, tracking her every move. During a pause, his hand lingered on hers as he passed a report, a deliberate touch that shivered through her mission warring with a longing to linger. She deflected with a nod, but her heart surged, torn between duty and the man beside her. Seizing Nathan's distraction, Sophie slipped into Victor's private study, her tools concealed in a clutch. The room, a fortress of knowledge with shelves of rare tomes, held a file cabinet behind a hidden panel, its lock formidable. Working swiftly, her hands steady despite adrenaline, she cracked the lock, finding notes on the rival's endgame. Names, dates, but no link to Nathan. She photographed the pages, her breath rapid, when a hallway creak halted her. Hiding the drive, she ducked behind a shelf as Nathan entered, his charcoal suit pristine, his expression troubled. Sophie held her breath, praying he'd miss the subtle shift, but his gaze paused at the panel. For a moment, exposure loomed, but he left, and she exhaled, trembling. The summit ended with agreements and applause, but Sophie's triumph was bitter. The drive a heavy burden, Nathan's presence a reminder of her betrayal's cost. In her room, clutching her family's photo, Nathan's face, his strength, his vulnerability, dominated her thoughts. She'd come to destroy him, but he was becoming her anchor, and his potential ruin was a fresh wound. The city's dawn glowed beyond the glass, a reminder of beauty's fragility in this deadly game. And Sophie braced for the inevitable clash between truth and love. A wilted orchid petal drifted across the marble floor of the Langley Estate's sunlit foyer, its delicate form a fleeting symbol of beauty fractured by the truth tearing through Sophie Turner's heart. She stood alone, her crimson gown replaced by a simple blouse, her hands trembling as she clutched a hidden drive, its damning contents. Photographs of handwritten notes revealing a rival's plot to sabotage Langley Enterprises. A dagger poised to cleave the empire she'd infiltrated. Yet the absence of Nathan Langley in those schemes weighed heavily, a piercing realization that he was a target, not a villain. His presence, his unyielding strength softened by raw sincerity, had become a wildfire, consuming her resolve with a love that defied her role as a corporate spy. The locket with her family's photo, a cold weight against her chest, tethered her to a mission to secure their future. But Nathan's essence, his quiet trust, his unguarded warmth, shone like a star, forcing her to face a choice that could shatter them both. The hours since her covert raid on Victor's study had plunged Sophie into a maelstrom of fear, every moment cloaked in the certainty that her deception was unraveling. The mansion's gilded halls, with their sleek elegance and veiled intrigues, were a stifling arena where every glance felt like an accusation. Nathan's relentless efforts to refine her persisted, with training in high-stakes negotiation and elite social grace, and Sophie maintained her facade as a dutiful secretary with desperate precision, her disarming warmth a shield against his probing gaze. Yet his eyes, sharp with suspicion yet softened by a deeper bond, seemed to pierce her disguise, igniting a dread that her true identity teetered on exposure. In a stolen moment by the mansion's koi pond, where water glimmered under dawn's light, Nathan's hand steadied her as she leaned to touch a lotus, the gentle strength of his touch sending a current through her, a longing she couldn't quell. She masked it with a fleeting smile, but the encounter left her heart in chaos, her mission warring with a desire to be seen, not as Sophie Turner or a spy, but as a woman who could claim a place in his life. Nathan, in his private office, stood before a shattered glass frame, the remnants of a corporate award mirroring the turmoil within. The summit had been a public triumph, strengthening his empire, but Sophie's presence, her keen intellect, her effortless authenticity, had deepened his unease. He'd envisioned a simple, malleable woman, a means to win his bet, but Sophie was a force. Her warmth was too sincere, her poise too refined for the role he'd assigned. The memory of her quiet strength at the summit, paired with the troubling disturbance in Victor's study, had ignited his instincts, a conviction that her transformation concealed a deeper truth. He opened a locked drawer, retrieving a cryptic message from Victor, its hints of unseen allies, now a chilling warning. Pouring a glass of scotch, its burn anchoring him, Nathan felt a tide stirred by Sophie, a need to know her, not as a bet's victory, but as a woman who had breached his soul's armor. The confrontation unfolded at dawn in the rose garden, where the air was thick with dew and unspoken pain. Nathan found Sophie among the blooms, her face a mask of anguish, his voice trembling as he spoke. "What are you hiding?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Sophie, trapped by the weight of her choices, felt her resolve crumble, the drive in her pocket a silent scream. She stepped forward, her emerald eyes glistening with tears. "I'm a spy for your rival, sent to steal your company's secrets," she confessed, her voice breaking. "But I love you, Nathan, and I can't do it." The revelation struck like lightning, shattering their fragile bond. Nathan staggered, his eyes flooded with pain, her betrayal cutting deeper than any corporate loss. He knew nothing of the rival's plot, but her deception had torn him apart. "I love you," he whispered, his voice raw, a confession suspended in the fragile morning air. Sophie's heart shattered, her chest aching, and she reached for him, their hands clasping in a desperate, fleeting moment of truth. The moment broke with the commotion inside. Victor's voice, sharp and commanding, announcing an emergency board meeting to address a leak. Sophie's contact, acting without her consent, had leaked evidence fragments to the press, sending shockwaves through Langley Enterprises. The main hall erupted in chaos, executives shouting, Victor's authority faltering. Nathan's gaze met Sophie's, a storm of betrayal and grief, and she knew the truth had cost them everything. She fled to her room, a single rose from the garden tucked in her pocket, a fragile relic of what might have been. Sending a final message to her contact, abandoning the mission, she collapsed on the bed, tears streaming as the scandal broke, exposing the rival's plot to the world. Nathan, alone in his office, held the locket Sophie left behind, its worn surface etched with her family's faces. Tracing its contours, he grasped the depth of her sacrifice and vowed to salvage his company, starting with exposing Victor's betrayal. He contacted his legal team, launching a full investigation, and began searching for Sophie, driven by a need for forgiveness. But the question lingered. Could he find her? Could love endure such a wound? The scars of truth and love would endure, a testament to a bond forged in deception and hope. Their story remained unresolved, a tapestry of love and betrayal left incomplete. Sophie, a shadow in the city, carried her rose and regrets, while Nathan rebuilt, haunted by the woman who had reshaped him. Their future hung in the balance, the possibility of reunion a fragile thread in the landscape of corporate warfare. Their journey's lesson echoed. Love, though radiant, could fracture under deception. But truth, however painful, could pave the way for redemption. For those who follow their saga, it's a call to courage, to face betrayal and fight for love against all odds. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.